Traveling by ship was long and arduous and incredibly boring, even on this monstrosity that her nephews had somehow managed to have built. Kevin was absolutely delighted with both the design and how quickly they were now able to construct one of these large pinnacle ships, as he called them. The first one, the Lion's Roar, had taken almost a full year to build. Almost 2,000 men had labored over it, and that was without the countless number of craftsmen who made the rigging, sails, and other parts of the ship. This ship, the Lady Joanna, was built in a little less than 6 moons. Each time they built one, they'd refined the process, and were now building numerous ships at the same time. The small folk in Lannisport had never had it so good, and Kevin was practically revered by them. She knew the cost was incredible, but in less than a year of working, the Lion's Roar had almost paid for itself. The sheer amount of cargo it could carry, the speed at sea while it made journeys, even in Bravos, it was practically legendary already. Jenna loved walking the deck, the steadiness of it surprising her every time. Not once since they'd left Lannisport had she felt the thickness of the sea, which she was most grateful for. "Annie, look at the birdies," Joy said, running up from behind her. "They're pretty, aren't they, Joy?" "Pretty birdies, Auntie," the little girl said, smiling as a gull ducked below the water. "Ouch, fishy," Joy said as the bird came back up with a fish in its mouth. "Come, Joy, let's go. It's lesson time." "No, Auntie Birdies." Joy crossed her arms and stamped her foot. Jenna couldn't help but laugh. She wasn't John. That wouldn't work on her. "Joy," she said, rising her voice. The little girl huffed and turned, and they headed back down to the large dining area she'd commandeered for their lessons. She had only given them brief history lessons on King's Landing and the Red Keep itself, and had allowed John to fit in stories of knights, kings, and battles to keep her boys interested. Now, though they were almost inside of Blackwater Bay, so she knew she needed to begin telling the children how to behave, Loras and John would be no problem, and Joy would either be with John or Geryon most of the time. But Lancel was at times even too arrogant to be a Lannister, while her boys and Kevin's youngest had never been in the presence of the royal family. "John," she heard Joy shout as she ran to jump into John's arms, the sight never failing to make her laugh. "Hello, Joy. Where were you?" "Where were you?" "On ship, John, seeing the birdies." "Did you see fishies, Joy?" "Birdie made fishy, ouch, John." Joy said, and John grabbed her and began tickling her. "No, John." "Stop," she giggled. Jenna nodded at him, and he lifted Joy up and sat her on his lap while she grabbed a chair and sat down, her boys immediately looking to her, as did Martin and Willem. Lancel, though, sat there with a bored expression on his face. "Right, we're about to arrive at King's Landing, and there are things you need to know." "What things, Mother?" Tion asked, and Walder giggled until she shot him a look. "There are ways you need to behave while we're there, especially with the royal family. Now listen carefully." And noticed Lancel trying his best to look disinterested. "You too, Lancel," she said, leaving no room in her voice for argument. "Now what do we say when talking with the king and queen?" We call them your grace, Auntie," Martin said shakily. "Very good, Martin," she smiled at the boy. "And the lords and ladies?" "My lord or my lady, Auntie," Willem said, not wanting to be outshone by his brother. "Very good, Willem. Now what do we do when we meet the king and queen or the prince?" "We bow, Mother, but Joy needs to curtsy," Tion said smugly. "Hi." "That's right. Walter, show me how you bow." Her son got up and made a passable bow. She would work on it later with him and Tion. "Joy, want to show me a curtsy?" Joy looked at John in confusion before looking to her, and back to John. "Joy, say your grace, remember." "John," said, lifting the girl to the ground. "Your grace," Joy said, and Jenna was stunned to see the girl give a far better curtsy than some older girls did. "Well done, Joy. That was really good." She smiled, and Joy laughed before John picked her up again. She wondered how he'd thought her that, but decided not to ask for now. The rest of the lesson went well. She felt at least the children would be fine if they had someone with them, which they would undoubtedly have in this place. Later that day, they had seen land and were moving in to dock. Jenna stood with the children who were waving at those standing by the dockside. She was surprised to see John Aaron there, having not expected a welcome party. As the ship glided into its docking position, she reveled in the amazed looks not just from the small folk, but from what was clearly sailors and captains of the other ships around them. The Lady Joanna easily dwarfed the largest ship on the docks, and she knew Jerian and Kevin had laughed loudly when they easily overtook the Fury while sailing across the bay. She had looked down on a clearly agitated Stannis as they passed. No doubt his teeth would be ground just a little more today. It didn't take long for the ship to dock, and they made their way down to be greeted. Lord Jaime. I welcome you to King's Landing. I thank you, Lord Hand, Jaime said. Lord Garyon, Lord Kevin, John Aaron said, greeting her brothers before moving to her. Lady Jenna, King's Landing has missed you, my lady. John Aaron said, trying to smile at her. I've not missed it, Lord Aaron, she said, even though she had. We've arranged for you to stay in the royal apartments, though we had not thought there would be so large a contingent of you. It's fine, Lord Hand. We prefer to stay in the family residence. It's much better for the children. Jaime said, My lord, if you're sure, my lord, John Aaron said. I think it's for the best, Lord Hand, Jaime said, and moved to get their things loaded on the carriages and carts that had arrived from their manse. Lord Kevin, I congratulate you on your appointment as Lord of Lamisport and Admiral of the Western Fleet. Such a worthy appointment, and with a ship like that you must be proud, my lord, John Aaron said to her brother as he stared at the Lady Joanna. Aye, the Lady Joanna's a fine ship. She and the other pinnacle ships are most worthy, Kevin said. Others? My lord? John Aaron asked worriedly. Aye, the Lady Joanna is one of 5 such ships, Kevin said proudly. She watched as John Aaron's face fell, then straightened once more. Good. Let him fear the wrath of lions. If there was one thing her late departed brother had right, it was that sometimes a little fear was a good thing. Unfortunately, Tywin didn't understand that it needed to be used in moderation, something she was glad that Jaime did. After saying their farewells to a clearly perturbed Lord Aaron, they finally made their way to their residence. She was looking forward to this tourney, to the balls and the feasts. It had been far too long. It was a pity she had to bring Emmon with her, though. She sighed as she looked at the sleeping form of her husband in the carriage beside her. Marjorie. Their arrival at King's Landing was uneventful. They were met by the Hand, but not the king or prince, much to her grandmother's annoyance. Lord Aaron said flattering words to her father, which he lapped up, even though it was technically an insult to not be met by at least one member of the royal family. Something she knew her grandmother would rage about later on for Marjorie, though she cared not about meeting the prince and was instead looking forward to seeing John again. It had been 2 years since they had met, and she found she missed her friend. He was not like the other lords and heirs or spares she'd been forced to deal with since the wedding. John didn't brag of his achievements or tell you how good he was or what someone had said about him. He was just John, and she missed that a lot. Since the wedding, they'd had numerous balls and feasts. Her name days had come and gone, and each time there had been a gift from John awaiting her. The wolf brooch she wore every day, the rose-covered hand mirror she kept among her things, and the beautiful illustrated book she kept by her bedside. The pictures of castles and mythical beasts were beautifully drawn, almost coming alive as you looked at them. The letters she'd exchanged through Loras had been neatly tied in a bow and kept at the base of her jewelry box. Every so often she'd pick one to read and smile as she read of John's yentures with joy. When Loras arrived alone for the tourney, she'd been upset and a little annoyed had John not wanted to visit her. She worried, but when Loras told her he was ill and handed her the letter he'd written, she felt happy and relieved that he would soon recover. That letter was the one she liked reading the most. It always made her feel better when she was sad, to know that out there somewhere her friend was thinking of her. "Is John not with you?" Marjorie asked after hugging her brother. "No, Marge. He took ill and wasn't able to travel." "Is he all right? Will he get better?" she asked worriedly. "Aye, he will be. Just needs to rest for a bit." "Oh," she said sadly, realizing that she wouldn't see him for who knows how long. "He did write you, though," Laura said, handing her John's letter. Later that day, she snuck off to a quiet area of the gardens and opened the letter. "Just Marjorie. I'm so sorry I couldn't come to see you this time. I swear I'll come visit you in your home one day soon. It seems the gods must hate me, for they've decided to make me ill. Just when I'd been looking forward to the visit more than anything, I wish I could be there to tell you of Joy and Ghost, of Laura's and the adventures we have, Yencher's. John as Joy would correct me were she there. I wish I could see you smile, make you laugh, sneak off away from everyone so we could dance. I shall count the days until I see my friend again, each one duller without you. Until then I'll write and smile, and each day shall think of you. We'll see each other sooner rather than later. I hope, your friend, Just John." Marjorie smiled as she thought of the letter and the fact that Loras had confirmed in his raven that John would be joining him this time. She had barely noticed her grandmother's voice calling her, and she looked up sheepishly to find they'd arrived at their rooms in the Maiden Vault. Her grandmother had hoped to be settled in Magor's Holdfast itself, but for some reason they'd not been, and she knew this would add to her chagrin. "Marjorie, are you listening, child?" Olenna said a little louder. "I'm sorry, grandmother, what did you say?" "Never mind, my dear, are you well?" "I'm fine, grandmother, a little tired from the journey." "Well, you should take a nap, my dear. We can't have you tired when you meet the prince later on." "Of course, grandmother." I had hoped we'd be closer to the royal apartments, but for God's knows whatever reason we've been housed all the way over here. You'd think the damn royals would know better than to treat the family bankrolling them such a way. Olenna said, her voice rising as she spoke. "Mother," Mace said, shaking his head. "Oh, do shut up, Mace. You know I'm right. How is Marjorie supposed to spend time with the prince from over here? No, this will not do." Marjorie tuned out the inevitable argument to come. Her father would no doubt receive a tongue lashing, and her grandmother would bring it up again and again to both the king and Hand until she got her way. She herself had no wish to be any closer to the prince. Each time she met the boy, she'd been less and less impressed with him. The things she'd heard about him didn't fill her with any desire to know him better. One night, unable to sleep, she'd walked to her grandmother's room to overhear her grandmother speaking to Willis. She'd not been able to resist, so had leaned against the door and listened. "Apparently the boy likes to berate the servants and worse," Willis said. "Worse?" she heard her grandmother ask. I've heard tell that he has moved from berating and having them dismissed from service to arranging for beatings to occur in front of him." "Are you sure of this?" her grandmother said worriedly. "I am, grandmother. It's been told by a number of our spies. This is not good. The boy's the key to the throne. Should he continue like this, the sound of footsteps forcing her to miss what else was said. Can I help you, my lady?" Eric's voice said as he walked towards Marjorie. "No, sir. I had come to speak to my grandmother, but she's busy. I shall talk to her on the morrow." "As you say, my lady," the guard said and bowed. After that, she had tried to find out more about the prince. When she'd brought it up with her grandmother or brother, though they changed the subject quickly, increasing rather than alleviating her concerns. She walked into her room and immediately went to the small jewelry box and took out the pile of letters. Picking one out, she began to read it, her eyes closing as she drifted off to sleep, the smile on her face unseen. Tyrion. The Lannister man's was impressive, As large as Keevan's residence in Lannisport and surrounded by a large wall and garden, it had stables and a separate area for guards, as well as the large main house itself. Inside, it was as would be expected of a Lannister property, extravagantly decorated with large paintings of lions and lords of the rock and various ancestors. He shuddered as he looked at the imposing portrait of his father before moving to his rooms. Jaime had all the family, along with Jon and Loras, kept in the same wing of the house. The other side was kept for the rest of their accompaniment. Tyrion watched as his belongings were carried into the room. The large chest full of books, his pride and joy. Once it was done, he looked around, glad to see the bed was comfortable and the desk neatly arranged. Harald, their steward, had done a great job in preparing the place. He left his room and walked down to his brother, passing the various servants that were rushing around, making sure his family were settled. When he reached the room, he was surprised to see Jaime alone. His brother had kept Jon very close on this trip, and he expected to see the boy inside. Thankfully, that meant Ghost was nowhere around, the wolf having constantly done his best to scare Tyrion to death on their journey here. "Ah, brother, come sit. We'll be heading over to meet the king and our sweet sister very soon," Jaime said, and Tyrion sighed. Oh, what joy. He japed, and Jaime laughed. "Come now, Tyrion. I'm sure you're looking forward to meeting the children, if nothing else. 2 of them, perhaps." Tyrion said, having no wish to meet his eldest nephew if it could be helped. "I needed to talk with you anyway, brother," Jaime said as Tyrion sat down. "Of course. So what shall we discuss? The smell, or that we're no doubt going to be leaned upon for coin by the hand?" Tyrion asked. "Well, we can't do anything about the smell. As for the hand, the answer is no, we're not helping them." "So anything else?" "Aye, a few things. Firstly, I shan't be returning to the Rock with you all. Jon and I will be heading north for a while," Jaime said, catching him by surprise. "Jaime, you can't. We've work to do," Tyrion said, shaking his head. "No brother you have, you're my heir, my Castellan. I trust you to keep things in order while I'm gone. There's no one I trust more," Jaime said with a smile. Tyrion felt the pride well up in his chest. No matter how many times Jaime made it clear he respected him or valued him, hearing it from his brother always managed to make him feel 10 feet taller. "Of course, brother, I won't let you down." "I know that, brother. Now the other thing is, it's time we began to play the game. There are things we need to know, players we must be aware of. I want you to begin to get the measure of them while we're here." Tyrion smiled brightly at this. He'd wanted to delve into the politics of the realm more. Up until now, he'd only done so in the West. He'd begun a network of spies and informants over the years, and knew exactly who thought what. In every castle in the Westerlands, he had learned secrets about lords that even his father had not known. To now get the chance to do so here was something he greatly looked forward to. He'd need to begin carefully, to start at the bottom, but he felt in time he could grow as big a network here as he had in the Westerlands. "I'll bring you a list of people we can trust, people to watch out for, but I want you to start your own. I'm sure you can compare them both." "Where will you get your list from?" he asked. "Oh, I have sources too, brother," Jaime smirked. "Now come, we have a king to bow to." The 2 brothers walked from the room, japing with each other as they did so, as they came to the end of the corridor. They were joined by Jon, Loras, and Joy. The 2 boys were holding her hands and swinging her in the air. The little girl's laughter was infectious, and both Tyrion and Jaime soon joined in. It was then Tyrion felt the by now usual tug on his britches. Where the wolf had come from was beyond him. But as Tyrion tried unsuccessfully to get him to stop, he was thankful to hear his cousin's voice. "Ghost, come," Joy said as she ran down the corridor, the wolf in hot pursuit. They made their way to the courtyard to find the 2 small carriages already waiting, Jenna and her boys in one, and the other for Kevin's family. He looked to see his Uncle Geryon trying to get Joy to join her aunt. But the girl seemed much more keen to ride along with Jon when she saw Winter was saddled. "My lords," Jon said, rushing over to his horse. Tyrion joined his aunt in the first carriage while Jaime and Loras mounted up. The gates opened, and they began their journey to the Red Keep itself. He resisted the urge to stick his head out the window and instead spoke to his aunt and cousins. Finally, they reached the Red Keep, and Tyrion eagerly got out of the carriage. The castle itself looked even more imposing than it had in Tyrion's books, the red stone making it stand out as if it was on fire, and the drum towers rising high. To Tyrion, though it wasn't as impressive as Casterly Rock, but he was happy to see it all the same. They were met by some gold cloaks, household guards, and Captain Vyler, who Tyrion noticed was deep in conversation with Jaime. "Shall we, nephew?" Jenna said as Tion and Walder rushed over to join their cousins and Jon. "If we must," Tyrion said with a smile.
"While?"
"It seems we must indeed," Jaime said, and Tyrion turned to see his brother standing behind him with a smirk on his face. As they walked through the castle, Tyrion was disappointed to see no sign whatsoever of the Targaryens who built it. All evidence they had existed had been removed or covered over, and Tyrion, who had secretly hoped to see a dragon skull, felt the replacing stag banners and paintings didn't have the same impact. When they reached the large double doors, the guards outside allowed them to enter. The room itself was incredibly impressive, large and imposing, and there at the front sat the king on the Iron Throne itself, the throne looking much more impressive than the man who sat on it. Lord Jaime Lannister, the Lord of Casterly Rock, and the Warden of the West. The herald's voice boomed. Lord Kevan Lannister, the Lord of Lannisport and First Admiral of the Western Fleet. Lord Geryon Lannister, the Lord of Castamere. Lord Tyrion Lannister, the heir to Casterly Rock. Lady Jenna Lannister, the Lady of Casterly Rock. Tyrion smiled at the last one. Jaime naming his aunt the Lady of the Rock would no doubt raise some eyebrows, but as his brother said, with neither of them married, and since she took on the duties, she may as well have the title. "Your Grace," Jaime said as he bowed before the king, the rest of their retinue doing the same. "Your Grace." His brother then said, looking directly at their sister, whose smile belied the monster that lay beneath it, "Lord Jaime, welcome to the Red Keep." The king said, and Tyrion thought his words slurred. Was he already drunk? "Indeed, it's good to see you, Lord Jaime," Cersei said, and Tyrion gulped as he saw the way she looked at his brother. Tyrion stood as the rest of the introductions were made. He noticed the smile the king gave, his uncle Geryon, and the grimace Cersei gave him. His uncle and aunt were welcomed both equally well by the king and queen, but when the king saw Jon and Loras was when things got interesting. "Jon Snow, come forward, your king wishes to see you. You can leave the flower behind." He japed, and Tyrion saw Jon's face crease while Loras, to his credit, just nodded. "Your Grace," Jon said, getting down on one knee. "Up, lad, let me look at you. You've grown, my boy. A fine lad you've grown into. Isn't that right, Jon?" "Aye, that he has, your Grace," Jon Arryn said while standing to the king's left. "You'll be competing in the duels, won't you, my boy?" the king asked. "With your Grace's leave, I'd like to," Jon replied. "My leave, I insist. You show them just like you did in Lannisport. I'm afraid your father hasn't come, my boy, but never mind. You'll be cheered on by a king." Robert said, his smile beaming. "Then I shall surely prevail, your Grace," Jon replied, and the king laughed loudly. "That's the spirit, lad." The back and forth continued for a few more moments, Robert basically ignoring everyone else while lost in conversation with Jon, speaking of battles and tourneys and how much like his father he looked. Tyrion could see that Jaime was watching the king intently, his hands opening and closing by his sides. Eventually, Jon Arryn coughed, and the king realized just how long he'd been speaking to Jon Snow and how that may look, so he brought their conversation to an end. "You'll be coming to the feast, won't you, lad?" Robert asked. "I'd be honored, your grace." "I piss on that, lad. At least with you there, I'll have someone to talk to," Robert said, his voice growing a little quieter at the end. "Well, let's move this along. I've roses and fishes to meet," Robert said, laughing loudly. Jon. The meeting with the king was harder than he had expected, the king still seeing him as Ned Stark's son, and because of it singling him out, even insulting Loras to do so. He had spoken as well as he could, but was glad they'd left the throne room. Just standing there brought up feelings he wasn't ready to face just yet. It was there in front of the throne that his brother and sister's bodies were presented to the impostor, who sat where his father should now be sitting. There in that very room that man had looked down at the mutilated bodies of his family, a babe and a girl of 3 name days, and loudly proclaimed that he saw no babes, only dragon spawn. As he stood there looking at the man, Jon had felt the rage rise inside him. Had he carried a weapon, he'd have buried it in the fat king's laughing face. It was only the sight of Sir Barristan which held his anger in check. All through the king's platitudes, the older knight had stared at him, offered him a reassuring smile, and Jon had managed to keep calm and bear through it all far better than he would have had Barristan not been there. When they left the throne room, they made their way out of the castle, and there they'd split up. Jaime bringing Jon and Loras with them for a surprise, while the rest had made their way back to the manse, much to Joy's annoyance. It was only after he promised her a present, and after Jirian had took her on his horse that Joy had agreed to go without him, he waved at her, and they were joined by Jors and Illyrs, while Ghost appeared before rushing off in front of them, scaring people as he went. "So, my lord, what's the surprise?" Loras asked as they walked. "If I told you then, it wouldn't be a surprise now, would it?" Jaime said, and Jon smirked. "What are you laughing at? You want to know as much as I do." Loras grumbled. I do, but I know better." "It's a surprise, you idiot," Jon said and bumped Loras in the shoulder. "Will you come visit my family with me afterwards, Jon?" Loras asked. "I don't know. Don't you want to see them on your own?" "Not really. Besides, if you come, we may get to spar while we're there." Loras said, "You can go with Loras, Jon. I have a few things I need to take care of, so I won't need either of you the rest of the day. Just make sure you're back for Joy's story. I'm not explaining to her where you are." Jaime said with a small laugh. Walking through King's Landing, he couldn't help but see how badly designed the place was, be it the smell, the closeness of the houses together. It seemed like the whole place had just went up with no thought whatsoever. When they came to a turning which led to a really run-down part of town, Jon shuddered to see the children begging in the street. He cursed himself for not bringing coin with him and vowed to return at some point and make amends. They crossed a place Jaime named as Fishmonger Square and continued on until finally entering the Street of Steel. Seeing where they were got both boys excited. As they walked, they could see large pieces of armor in the window, could hear the sounds of the hammers hitting anvils. They walked to the top of the street and came to a building that was much larger than all the others. They entered and were immediately met by a young man who asked their business before rushing to the back. "My lord, a pleasure to have you visit my shop," a large bald man wearing an apron said as he walked into the room. "Tobo, I trust you finished the items I've ordered," Jaime said. "Aye, of course, my lord. Some of my best work, Gendry. Bring Lord Jaime's order out," Tobo shouted to the back. "I'll be needing some more armor also. My usual should suffice. Plus a number of shields. I'm sure that won't be a problem," Jaime said, and the man nodded enthusiastically. After a few moments, a boy of around Jon's age came out. Though he was a lot larger than Jon, the boy had dark hair and bright blue eyes and looked at them with an almost angry look, though it softened when Jon smiled. "You is Master Tobo," Gendry said, handing the blacksmith 2 swords and scabbards. "Good lad," Tobho said. And the boy smiled at the older man. "I made simple scabbards, my lord, although should you wish I can make them more fancy like the swords themselves." "No, that's fine," Jamie said, taking the first sword out. The sword was a smaller version of a long sword, perhaps made for someone not fully grown. John thought and was proved correct when Jamie turned to Loris. "It's time you were both armed. You're skilled enough for it. Loris, this is for you," Jamie said, handing Loris the sword. John looked on as his friend's eyes widened. Loris took the sword almost reverently and examined it carefully. He had to admit it was an incredible-looking thing. The blade itself was far better made than most John had seen, and certainly of a quality he'd not seen on any sword other than Jamie's, or the 2 Valyrian swords he'd seen, Dark Sister and Ice. The hilt was a smooth, dark leather, while the guard was curved in what to John looked like thorns, the pommel a golden stone shaped like a rose. He smiled as he saw the emotion on Loris's face before turning to see his own sword being handed to him. This sword was a smaller, thinner blade, a copy both of his training sword and Dark Sister. As he held it, he marveled at its lightness, making even the training sword feel heavy in comparison. His sword's hilt was a smooth black leather, the pommel a white wolf's head with 2 red stones serving as the eyes. The guard was curved downward in the shape of a wolf's claw, and John could see the care that had gone in the making of the sword. "I thank you, my lord, Master Tobho," John said with a large smile. "As do I," Loris added, finally coming out of the daze he'd been in since he'd received the sword. "You're welcome, my lord," Tobho said, and John didn't feel the urge to correct him. "Now lads, these are no training swords. You're to be careful with them. If you abuse the trust I'm showing, then I'll have no problem taking them back," Jamie said, and both he and Loris nodded understandingly. They strapped their new swords to their sides, he and Loris both happy to see how well they fit as they left the shop. John looked around to see where Ghost had gotten to, only to hear a commotion from down the street. The wolf soon came running up, followed by an angry-looking man who was waving a large stick about. As he arrived at where John was standing, he saw the reason for the man's anger hanging from Ghost's mouth. The roll of blood sausage had perhaps at one point been quite large, but as Ghost sat in front of him, John watched it disappear into the hungry wolf's mouth. "My lord," John said to a clearly amused Jamie, who threw him a couple of gold dragons. "There he is. Grab him, thief," the large man said as he reached them. "I'm sorry about him. Perhaps this would suffice," John said, throwing the man a gold dragon. He could see the man wasn't satisfied, so threw the other one. "Just keep the damn beast away from my store," the man said, turning and walking away. "Really?" John said, looking to the wolf who was licking his lips. The blood sausage gone now. Ghost just cocked his head and looked him in the eye. John could swear the wolf was saying, "What's the problem? I caught it, so I ate it. Pesky 2 foots and their silly rules." He turned to see both Loris and his guards were laughing loudly. Jamie, too, was smiling, so he turned back to Ghost and smirked. "Come on, you big furball. How about a nice chicken?" John said as the wolf jumped up and wagged his tail. They walked back through the streets, stopping off so John could buy Ghost the chicken he promised him, the wolf eagerly eating it down before running off to do God knows what. After walking for what felt like an age, they arrived back at the castle, Ghost turning up just as they did. The guards weren't keen on letting them enter, but John was surprised to see Sir Barristan walk over to them and speak on their behalf. "My thanks, sir," John said with a smile. "Don't mention it, lad," Barristan said and looked at John intently. John nodded and turned to Jamie, who seemed to understand. "Sir Barristan, come, let's speak of tourneys past and former brothers," Jamie said. "Aye, let's do that, Lord Jamie. Loris, John, I bid you both a good day." Barristan said as he and Jamie walked away. John could see how Loras was looking at the two men as they walked away, the look of wonder on his face. The two greatest knights in the 7 kingdoms off to speak of past adventures, what either of them would give to be a fly on the wall for that conversation. Come, John. I'm sure if I keep my grandmother waiting much longer, she'll skin me alive. I didn't know your grandmother was a Bolton, Loras. John japed. Oh, John, poor John. You have no idea. My grandmother makes the Boltons seem like mummers. Laura said, his smirk curling up, and John gulped. Come, ghost, you'll protect me right, John said, and the wolf nodded. Sir Barristan. Standing in the throne room while Robert spoke to his king had been torture. He could see the boy was holding something in, did he know? Had Jamie told him, he wondered. As he looked to John, he felt he did. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there when he met him at the tourney. A determination, a focus he hadn't had before. As he watched him look at the king, he could see hatred in his eyes. He had done his best with smiles and looking reassuringly at him to try calm him down, and he was glad it seemed to work. The boy stayed polite and friendly, and the king was overjoyed to speak to him. After what felt like an age, they left, and Barristan was happy his shift was ending. He made his way back to White Sword Tower and cleaned up before heading out for the day, hoping to bump into Jamie so they could speak. And if he had John with him, then so much the better. Sir Richard, he said as he walked from the tower. Lord Commander, I was wondering if I could speak to you of the prince. Of course, sir. His behavior is getting worse, Sir Barristan. I don't know what we're to do. I know, Richard. I'll see if it can be brought to the hand's attention. Until then, I'm afraid there's not much we can do. Barristan said and felt sorry for the other knight. Sir Richard had surprised Barristan. While immensely loyal to the Baratheons, the man seemed to have more honor than he'd given him credit for. He hated guarding the crown prince or the queen, and had become disillusioned guarding the king. The only time the man seemed happy was when he guarded the prince and princess. Barristan resolved to allow the man more time, guarding the younger children. He deserved to keep his faith in the crown for a while longer. Richard, until then, I'll change your duties. You'll be guarding Prince Tommen and Princess Marcella Moore. Thank you, Lord Commander, Richard said gratefully, and Barristan nodded at him before leaving. Barristan walked quietly through grounds coming to the gates, and was pleased to see Jamie arriving with his king and the young Tyrell boy. He looked to see some commotion, and was shocked to see the large white wolf his king was standing beside. Jamie had told him about the wolf in his letters, but seeing it in person was something much different. The wolf was as large as a small horse, and Barristan had no doubt it could be incredibly dangerous if it so wished. Making his way over to them, he deduced they didn't wish to allow the wolf access. Is everything all right here? He asked the leader of the household guard. Aye, Sir Barristan just telling Lord Jamie that his squire's wolf can't be allowed inside the castle. And why it that Captain Sado, Sir Barristan? It's a wild beast. It wouldn't be safe to allow him inside, the captain answered, shaking his head. Looks pretty tame to me. Lord Jamie, is there any danger to be had from the wolf? Barristan asked, smirking at Jamie. No, sir. The wolf's only a danger to those who wish to harm it or my squire, Jamie said, nodding to him. So there you have it, Captain. Let the wolf in. Should anything go wrong, I and Lord Jamie will take responsibility. If you're sure, sir, the captain said, allowing the wolf access. John smiled and thanked him, and he and Jamie headed off under the pretense of speaking as former brothers. They walked quietly for a while before arriving at a small tavern. Entering, they were immediately seated at a quiet table at the back. Barristan had used this tavern before. It was owned by the Lannisters, though he was sure not even the spider knew that, and he had taken to come here on his days off so as to not alert anyone of its significance. He knew that both the spider and the master of coin had spies everywhere, and had noticed a few of them try to follow, though when they entered here they'd never be allowed anywhere near him, the tavern keeper and serving girls all knowing them far too well by now. After being brought some wine and a plate of bread and cheese, he and Jamie began to speak. "Your squire looks well. My lord, is he competing in the duels?" "Aye, he is, sir. I look forward to it." "The king has changed the rules, you know. It's only half duels now, followed by a melee. He's also raised the age to 4 and 10 name days." "Are you serious? You'll put young boys in a melee?" Jamie said, shaking his head. "Aye. The last 8 go into a melee. Up until then it's a duel. Perhaps young John should sit this one out." Barristan said, the worry clear in his voice. No, he would never do it. Besides, the king will want to see him in the damn thing. "What do you think?" Barristan asked, noticing the frown on Jamie's face. "What? Oh, John will be fine, sir. It's more Laura's I'm worried about. The boy's still a bit temperamental, but with John with him, they'll be fine," Jamie said, smiling now. "Good. He looks well, Jamie. Seems different somehow," Barristan said leadingly. "Aye, he is Barristan. He's learned so much." Jamie nodded and Barristan smiled. "I'd like to talk to him, if that would be all right." "Of course. I'll see to the arrangements. I'm sure he'd love to speak to Barristan the Bold," Jamie said, and Barristan felt his heart race. "So how are things here, Barristan? It must be so dull without me." "Aye. Though I find I'm reminded more and more of our times together before His Grace took the throne." He watched as Jamie looked at him and he nodded, seeing the realization dawn in Jamie's eyes. "Really? And why is that, sir?" "Oh, princes, my lord. Just thinking on differences between princes and how some princes behave more like some kings," Barristan said and watched as Jamie shuddered. "And the court?" "Sir Barristan, how does the court fare?" "You know the court, Jamie. The more it changes, the more it stays the same," Barristan said and tapped Jamie's knee under the table, feeling the man's hand reach out. He handed him the folded piece of paper. "Indeed, sir, I do not miss it, though I would hope that would change in time." "As do I, my lord." The two men spoke then of tourneys and jousting, of swords and battles. They laughed as they remembered things they got up to with men who'd long since passed, and while at times they both felt a little bit sad, by the time they bid their farewells, each man was walking with more of a spring in their step. Circe, she had been furious to find that her family would be staying in their private residence, had done her very best to ensure the guest rooms and the holdfast would be put aside for her family rather than the grasping Roses, only to find to her annoyance that Jamie would be staying elsewhere. When she saw him in the throne room, she felt her heart beat that little bit faster. When he looked at her, she had felt the heat pull between her thighs and had needed to squeeze them together just to get some relief. He looked even more handsome than he had the last time she saw him, his hair having grown longer and worn loose, his chiseled body coiled beneath clothes she wished to rip from him in front of everyone. When the introductions had been finished, she'd hoped he would stay around and she would get her chance to speak to him, to tell him how much she had missed him, how much she needed him. But after the fat oaf had his little love in with Ned Starks by blow, Jamie and the rest had quickly departed and Circe was left to sit and fume while the rest of these inconsequential fools came and presented themselves to their betters, none of them showing the right amount of deference to her or her son and instead fawning over the oaf as if he actually mattered. Lord Edmure Tully, heir to Riverrun and representing the Lord Paramount of the Riverlands. She heard the herald say, and she watched on in boredom. Lord Jason Mallister, Lord of Seaguard, Lord Tytos Blackwood, Lord Janos Bracken. On and on it went, and she began to worry that the foolish fish had brought the entirety of the Riverlands with him. Lord Raymond Derry. She heard the snort from her husband beside her and decided to have some fun. "Lord Derry, it's good to see such a noble and loyal lord," Cersei said, stunning the man. "Loyal, only because the damned dragons were beaten," Robert said loudly beside her. Your Grace, Raymond said uncomfortably. "You can go, my lord," Cersei said with a smirk. "By your leave, your Grace," Raymond said and quickly turned to leave. "Aye, turn tail. It's what you're good at," Robert drunkenly said while the room quietened. "Robert," Jon Arryn said, reproaching the king, who was not best pleased. "No, Jon, enough. I'll not have dragon sympathizers in my presence. Not on this day," Robert said loudly yet again. "Then perhaps we should put off meeting with the Tyrells until tomorrow, my love," Cersei said sweetly. "Aye, we shall, enough. That's it for the day," Robert said as he staggered from his chair. "Robert, you can't," Jon Arryn said, rushing after him. Cersei got up from the throne and walked to her quarters, not even waiting for the lords and ladies to be dismissed. She smiled as she did so. Watching Arryn toddle after the fat oaf pleased her greatly. When she reached her room, she immediately motioned for wine to be brought and sat down. When the servant brought the wine, she dismissed her, wanting to enjoy her wine in peace. She poured the wine into her glass and walked to the window, looking out. She could almost see the Lannister manse in the distance, or at least imagined she could. She wondered what Jaime was doing right now. She drained the glass and sighed. It would be hours until the welcoming feast, until she saw him again. She needed to speak with him, to arrange a meeting. But how? She smiled and turned, calling her servant back in. "Bernadette, make sure Myrcella and Tommen are unable to attend the feast tonight," she said, as the girl rushed to do her bidding. Olenna was furious, more angry than she'd ever been. Even her granddaughter had been unusually quiet, having felt her wrathful tongue when she had tried to cheer her up. How dare they? Who did they think they were, treating them this way after everything they'd done for the crown? To be humiliated such was something she would not accept. It was bad enough that they were not met by the royal family when they arrived, or that they were placed here rather than the royal wing where they belonged. But this was the final straw. To have been told while waiting for their presentation that they would not be getting one was something she would not tolerate. Luckily for him, Jon Arryn had sent Baelish to make his apologies. Had he came himself, then he would have felt the full brunt of Olenna's anger. Instead, she found much to her consternation that Baelish was a different sort. The smugness of the man, while she had berated him, had almost forced her to lose her composure more than she already had. But instead, she reined in her worst impulses and was content to shoot the man a withering look and forced him from her sight. Something she was incredibly happy to see left and right accomplish, and finally getting under the man's skin. "Mother, what are we to do?" Mace asked, his face as flushed as she felt. "Nothing yet. But this will not stand, I promise you that." The rest of the day passed, much as the morning had. Around her, people tried their best to stay out of her way, some succeeding more than others. Finally, after lunch, she felt her mood improve. She turned to speak to her granddaughter, only to be interrupted by one of the servants. "My lady, your grandson and his friend have come to visit." The girl said, her voice quiet and timid. "Very well, send them in," Olenna said, looking to the door. What she saw forced her to jump back in her seat and sent her guards reaching for their swords. The animal was huge, as large as a small horse, its fur whiter than snow. She almost screamed as it moved to her granddaughter, was just about to order her guards to cut it down when Loras and Jon Snow walked into the room. "Ghost, to me," Jon Snow said, and the animal looked from him to Marjorie. "He's fine." "Just Jon, aren't you, Ghost?" Marjorie said as the animal laid its head in her lap, allowing her to rub its head and scratch behind its ears. "Argery, what is that thing?" she shouted, finally able to speak. "Oh, this is Jon's direwolf ghost, grandmother," her granddaughter said, and the wolf turned and looked at her directly in the eyes, its piercing red eyes almost searching for something before they turned back to her granddaughter. "Ghost is no danger, grandmother. Isn't that right, John?" Loris said to the dark-haired boy. "Aye, my lady. You have nothing to fear from him, but if it would put your worries at rest, I'll remove him for you." Olenna looked at the boy and then her grandson. Both seemed completely relaxed. She looked to the wolf, who was behaving like a giant puppy under her granddaughter's hands. A part of her almost demanded it be removed. But she decided to leave it be for now. Perhaps making friends with a direwolf would be a good thing, she thought. "No, it's fine. Although perhaps some warning in future, young Snow," Olenna said pointedly. "Of course, my lady, I apologize," the boy said with a bow. "Very well. Take a seat, the both of you. I won't have you standing around looking down on me. There's been far too much of that for one day." She watched as the boys sat down. She was glad to see her grandson again and was intrigued that he brought Jon Snow with him. His letters back to her since he'd moved to Casterly Rock hadn't been the treasure trove of information she'd hoped. It was clear that Loras and Jon had become friendly, and the ties they had between them had been strengthened. It was also clear her grandson had not only blossomed under Jaime Lannister's tutelage, but had enjoyed his time there also, which, if nothing else came from it, would suffice for Olenna. But she had hoped to find something more about Jon Snow, some reasoning behind how the boy seemed able to achieve so much. The mines were one thing, but the wind wheels which had started popping up in the Reach, and the ships which were the envy of her good son, were another. In all the letters, though, the only thing she had to go on was that Jon was very intelligent and treated like family by the Lannisters. That in itself was no longer a surprise. With the boons he'd brought to them, she too would be treating him like family if he was in the Reach. Apart from that, according to Loras, the only significant things about Jon Snow was that everyone he met seemed to like him, and that he was her grandson's best friend. "So, Loras, how have you been?" Olenna asked to get the ball rolling. Perhaps in conversation, something may be revealed. "Very well, grandmother. We're looking forward to the duels. Very much, aren't we, Jon?" "Aye, we are, my lady," Jon Snow said, and Olenna noticed him looking to her granddaughter. "How was your journey, Joan?" Marjorie asked, smiling at the boy. "It was very good, my lady. The new ship was so much more agreeable than the last one I traveled on," Jon said, smiling back. "You came on that monstrosity?" Olenna said, raising her eyebrow. "Aye, we did, my lady. The Lady Joanna's a fine ship," Jon said. "Indeed, I've never been on anything like it before, grandmother," Loras added. "Is it true you designed it, Jon?" Marjorie asked a little quietly. "I came up with the idea, my lady, but Lord Tyrion and Lord Kevin were the ones who saw her built." Olenna looked carefully at the boy. She had, of course, known that he supposedly came up with the idea for the ships, but the question was how? How does a boy of 10 name days keep coming up with ideas that make the Lannisters more and more powerful? She wished so much for once to just be blunt, to just come right out and ask the boy just how he had managed such a thing. But in the Game of Thrones, bluntness was not something that helped. So instead, she bided her time, allowed Jon Snow to come visit her precious Rose. No doubt he and Loras would be happy with that. She'd watch and she'd learn, and if she had any say on it, then by the end of this tourney, she'd know everything there was to know about Jon Snow.